Welcome to this explainer on the events of January 6th. Imagine waking up and finding out the government had practically collapsed overnight. No peaceful transfer of power. Nobody knows who's in charge. Today, we're going to unpack the timeline of a day that honestly sounds like a crazy political thriller, but was entirely real.
The stakes of what happened that day? Absolutely astronomical. As you'll see here, for a few terrifying hours, America stood closer to losing its democracy than most people realize. We're talking about a massive crisis right in the heart of modern America, an event with consequences that could have completely shifted the trajectory of history forever. Even today, millions of us barely grasp just how close the whole system came to the edge.
So, I've got to ask you directly, what actually happens when democracy halts? We always tend to think of democratic systems as, automatic, kind of like gravity. But what happens when the machinery just stops? Well, to really understand this collapse, we have to look at the environment that created it. Part 1. A nation deeply divided.
So, the date was January 6th, 2021. At first, it really just looked like another freezing winter morning in Washington, D.C. But you have to remember, the 2020 election had already completely fractured the country. For weeks, claims of election fraud had spread like wildfire. Courts had rejected a lot of accusations, but the distrust, it just kept growing. People on all sides were totally emotionally exhausted. Families were arguing, friendships were ending, and millions genuinely believed the country was headed for absolute ruin. At a rally near the White House, two overlapping realities kind of merged. On one hand, you had thousands who came completely peacefully to protest, carrying flags, holding signs. But right beside them was a totally different reality. People who arrived angry, literally ready for a physical confrontation. Very few people in that crowd realized just how fast the whole environment was about to flip.
And man, it escalated so fast. Speeches are echoing through the crowd. Emotions are rising higher and higher. People are shouting, cheering, and physically pushing closer together. Some folks truly felt they were defending their country, while others felt they were watching the end of America. And then came the critical pivot. A sudden, massive, unpredictable movement of the crowd directly toward the Capitol building.
Part 2. The Capitol under attack. Inside the Capitol, lawmakers were meeting for what's normally a totally routine, almost boring process, certifying election results. But outside, security watched the crowd swell. Protesters pushed forward. Barricades shook. Warnings were shouted. And then, boom, chaos exploded. Within minutes, the outer perimeter fell. Police lines broken.
The physical barriers of one of the most highly protected buildings in the United States just gave way. Windows shattered as protesters flooded right into the building.
Alarms rang across the building. I really want you to try and imagine the intense sensory reality of being inside that structure in that exact fraction of a second. 1 minute, you're a politician quietly debating electoral votes. The next, you are hearing blaring alarms, screaming, and the sound of breaking glass echoing down these massive marble hallways.
Absolute panic took over the corridors. At first, lawmakers literally froze in disbelief, thinking it was just a loud protest outside. But then, Capitol Police rushed in, yelling for an immediate evacuation. Gas masks were handed out. Doors were barricaded with heavy furniture. Security officers literally drew their weapons right there inside the halls of Congress. The vice president was rushed to a secure location just moments before rioters reached areas dangerously close to him. Elected leaders were hiding under their desks, desperately texting their loved ones because they genuinely feared they might not survive the day.
Part 3. A system in crisis.
Let's slow down for a second here and really absorb the gravity of this crisis. It was terrifying precisely because nobody knew how far it was going to go. There were reports of explosive devices nearby, some folks in the crowd were armed, security teams feared a hostage situation. For the first time in generations, America's peaceful democratic process wasn't just being debated, it was being violently interrupted. And this wasn't just a domestic issue, The entire world was watching on live TV. Foreign leaders were carefully monitoring it. American allies were left absolutely stunned. The nation that had spent decades promoting democracy around the globe suddenly had its own system looking dangerously fragile. And as you might expect, rivals of the United States immediately seized on the chaos, using it as propaganda to say, look, America can't even protect its own political system.
As the hours dragged on, the pressure just mounted. National Guard troops and police reinforcements from nearby agencies finally showed up, slowly pushing rioters out room by room. But even as the building was cleared, this haunting question hung in the air. Would the violence spread to other cities? The uncertainty was intense. Would Americans accept the outcome peacefully? At that moment, literally nobody knew the answer.
Historians now point to this exact period of limbo as one of the greatest tests of American democracy in modern history. The cleared building wasn't the end of the fear. Actually, it was the start of a really profound question about whether Americans would accept the outcome peacefully, and a realization about the deep vulnerability of the nation.
Part 4. The certification continues.
Late that night, something truly remarkable happened. Despite the violence, the absolute chaos, and all that lingering trauma, lawmakers made a deeply symbolic decision. They chose to return to the chambers. Keep in mind, this is a damaged Capitol we're talking about. Broken glass is still covering parts of the floor. Historic hallways are visibly damaged. Heavy security forces and tactical gear are standing literally everywhere. The physical wreckage of the building was in stark contrast to the resilience of the political process starting back up inside it. It sent a definitive message to the world. The democratic process would not be halted.
Finally, in the early hours of January 7th, the election results were officially certified. The immediate, violent crisis had concluded and the process was finished. But man, the event had exposed some massive, previously unnoticed cracks in the foundation of the system.
Part 5. The fragility of democracy. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what it teaches us about our deeper philosophical takeaway.
So how could this happen? What is democracy actually required to survive? Well, democracy is not just about casting a ballot. It's fundamentally dependent on something incredibly fragile: trust. It requires trust that elections matter, trust that institutions will hold up under extreme pressure, and honestly, the hardest part of all, trust that people will accept the outcomes even when they lose. Once that shared trust begins to collapse, instability follows rapidly.
And January 6th wasn't just some bizarre modern anomaly. It actually fits a clear historical pattern of institutional collapse. Think about it. Ancient Rome slowly lost faith in its institutions before plunging into political violence. In Europe during the 1930s, citizens lost confidence in weakened governments, which changed seemingly stable nations forever. And on January 6th, modern America came face to face with that exact same historical vulnerability.
When people imagine threats to a nation, they usually picture foreign invasions or military coups. But democracies usually weaken from internal division long before external enemies destroy them. The greatest threats are often born from human nature: political anger, misinformation, and fear, all combining into an explosive force right within a society.
Ultimately, democracy is not protected by buildings, politicians, or slogans alone. It survives only when enough people choose to protect it together. For millions watching that day, the illusion that democracy is automatic, permanent, and guaranteed forever was completely shattered. The United States passed the test on January 6th, but only barely.
Which leads me to leave you with this final, lingering thought. Did we learn enough? Did the events of January 6th actually teach us what we need to know to protect our institutions? Or could something even worse happen in the future? History has a really dangerous habit of repeating itself when people stop paying attention. Think about that, let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.